Welcome to Forged in the Fires podcast with Fireman Rob. Being a fireman, father, veteran, husband, world record holder, and Ironman, he brings stories of experience to impact your life while challenging you to live it. What do you want from your life? Why do you want it? Are you willing to go through the challenges to get there? If you have the courage to take that first step, let this podcast be the catalyst to start your fire while you bring the resilience to make it continue to burn. Our lives are made up of moments called right nows. So let's get started. Forged in the Fires podcast with your host, Fireman Rob, begins now.
I've got a great interview that I want to take out of the In the Zone archives and bring to you. It's with Rob Urbach. Rob is an amazing, eclectic individual who has been around the sports arena for a long time, everywhere from working with the main agent for Michael Jordan all the way to now running the Iditarod. I hope you enjoy the interview. And now, Rob Urbach. All right, welcome back to In the Zone with Fireman Rob, brought to you by Endurance Zone TV. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have a great guest. First, I got to do a little housekeeping. If you haven't followed us on Facebook or Instagram, go to Endurance Zone TV. Follow us. There's going to be so many great things that you want to be a part of. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would suggest you go ahead and do that, because there's going to be so much content that you're just going to be sitting on your bike for more than 2-3 hours and going on your treadmill. You're just going to want to be on there. This next gentleman that I have on the show is amazing. He is, I almost want to call him a renaissance, because he is in everything. He is from triathlon to Iditarod to, well, he worked for one of the best sales agents that you know. I mean, maybe you know this guy named Michael Jordan. I don't know. But David, or Rob, it's so great to have you on the program today.
Thanks. It's really great to be here. And I think it's, like we talked about briefly, it's now is a time to adapt, evolve, and innovate. So that's part of the Renaissance strategy, I suppose. I don't know by design, but hopefully by outcome.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, your story, and I love how it all goes back to when you're in high school and you saw that Ironman World Championships, and that kind of transitioned you into something that you maybe didn't even expect. Go back to that time. What was it about that race that really appealed to you?
You know, it was, triathlon was not really well known. I didn't know any triathletes. There were just a handful of races around. I read the Sports Illustrated article as a junior in high school, and for some reason, I thought that was just the mojo, the perseverance, the challenge of that event. You know, I was just a kid, I guess, who was seeking and inspired by the stories and by the challenges of the sport. And I, didn't have a background at all in playing different sports at the time, and dabbled, of course, in a little swim, bike, and run, but certainly not the level it takes to do an Ironman triathlon. It was just the perseverance, the tenaciousness, the sense of adventure,
right?
And it really resonated. So I was on a mission. I want to do that. And family, friends, and parents. What do you mean? Well, you're not going to do that. That's a crazy thing to do. That's ridiculous. People can't do that. And this is before it was, in the lexicon of our physical culture. Right. So it was just something that really, really resonated.
And it didn't take long before you got to those lava fields. It was 2 years, wasn't it?
Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. But, like most of us in the sport now, it's a little different because there's so much material and clubs. But back then, you just had to figure it out on your own. You're a lot more self-reliant. So, yeah, in certain respects, what you don't know can only help you in that regard.
Sometimes the ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
So now, like transitioning in your life, you had this transition where you'd done triathlon and you're kind of doing it still, but you went to the sports agent, kind of that sports agent, marketing, all that kind of stuff. And you worked for a pretty prominent, or with a prominent person, David Falk. How was that?
It was a very intense period. Most of that's a rough and tumble world to a degree. But I had, to come to that quickly is I wanted to work in the sports business, and I had produced my own little triathlon in college and got some experience in sponsorship and events and what it take to produce and organize. And I was a sports fan, a sports kid, growing up. So when I first got hired, there were a couple big firms at the time. One was IMG and the other was ProServe. So I reached out to both, and I went to Wharton Business School, and so I figured I'm going to come out and immediately on day one, I'm going to be hanging out with Michael Jordan and working on that business. But I was sort of like given a desk and a phone and said, make us some money. And by the way, here are your clients. Oh, great. Client list I can work with. And it was people I hadn't heard of because I'm the lowest guy in the totem pole, right? And, I ended up, how close you follow the NBA, but there was a player named Jeff Malone on the Utah Jazz. Pretty good player. But, Karl Malone was the man. Yeah. So I ended up doing a shoe deal in Brazil for Jeff. I think they thought it was Carl because they paid him a lot of money. And I kind of got noticed for that. That was the big Jeff Malone deal, and got noticed by David and did a pretty significant early deal. I got a little lucky and did a deal that involved like Larry Bird and Joe Theismann and Jimmy Connors. And we put together a promotion in all different sports, and it was a big success. And so then I got David sort of took me under his wing, which wasn't always great because you had to negotiate like your salary with him every year, and that you could never win at because he was the best negotiator, right? And took pride in that. But it was a great learning experience. Then learning to work for athletes, like when I ultimately graduated doing some of Michael's deals, and learning from the intensity and the ability to perform for the leaders in the NBA and other sports was a great experience at that time. And this is when the NBA was exploding. We were doing some stuff in other Olympic sports and football and baseball as well. But the NBA really took off.
And it had to be crazy in that time period, because like you look at now and the amount of stuff we're marketing and advertising, it's prevalent. But in the time period when you were working, there wasn't as much. It was a lot more effort that had to be put on, in essence, the sports agents to be able to get this stuff.
Yeah.
What was that challenge like?
So the one thing that we did was, the perception was that basketball, back in the late 80s was still like tape delay. It wasn't prime time. There wasn't NBA TV. There wasn't the internet. The internet is starting to take off now. So digital assets are coming on board. And we, at some point in the late 90s or in 96, 97, if you saw Last Dance, this is sort of Michael's championship season, about that time, we told all his companies you couldn't use Michael in basketball and advertising because we wanted him to transcend the sport. So his last commercial work, there's no on-the-court stuff anymore. He's this global icon. He's arguably the most recognizable person in the world. It was Michael and Princess Diana at the time. And
she couldn't dribble a ball, so.
Yeah, right. I forgot the name at the time, who the leader of China is, because there's a lot of people in China who know who he is, right? So anyway, he was big in China. But it was using him off the court. Then that was when finally you could truly have an athlete that was transcendent. And on the back of Michael they paved the way for, Kobe and LeBron, represented Kobe as well, and LeBron James and everybody else, that now they become these cultural phenomena. And it was easy, football is a little harder because you're wearing a helmet and a uniform, and one knows what you look like, if often outside the quarterbacks and some of the bigger names. But basketball really just exploded. And then we dabbled into different things, and we did Space Jam, the movie, and we started a production company and a cable channel. And, I did a lot of different opportunities. I made a whole documentary out of Muggsy Bogues, a 5'3" player, lasted 12 years in the NBA.
Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah. So Muggsy's a great guy, and we were able to do a lot of leveraging that. I did a show on ESPN, the first kind of half-hour look behind the scenes of athletes called Jam Central. And so we were able to pioneer the convergence of sports and entertainment. You hear that a lot, but that's really started back in those years, over 20 years ago. And
Wow.
so great to be at that time, and the TV ratings were going up, and the dollars became really big, and Nike was taking off with fantastic advertising and
Right.
Sprite commercials, and just all this convergence was happening. And the NBA almost replaced baseball as America's pastime. It was more global. It had better ratings. It had more excitement. It did better well to Gen X because it was a quicker game. And every kid wanted to be Michael Jordan at the time. So it was a great, it was a little bit of luck, being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
But I worked for David for almost 12 years,
Wow.
which was pretty interesting. And we went through various transactions of corporate ownership during that period, and we got involved in working everybody from Coach K at Duke to Andre Agassi on the tennis side.
Now you transitioned. You had a few more things, but then you went to USA Triathlon. How was that transition, and what did you take from what you learned in that business that you were in to be able to be that top person in USA Triathlon and really bring them to a different level?
Yeah, no, thanks. It was, Triathlon is, of course, a governing body and a nonprofit. And I think there's this perception that, nonprofits were run differently, and so I said, gee, I'm not sure there's that much of a different operation. There should be discipline, metrics, measurables. At the time, there wasn't a lot of that. The board was in disarray. There was a huge battle over resources. Of, do we spend it to support amateur Ironman athletes or on the Olympic program? So there was a lot of division. There was a total bipartisan board. And I came in there and said, we need to share the win here, because if our athletes do better on the Olympic stage, that's going to create more exposure. More exposure means more inspiration, means more opportunities for everyone in our sport, whether you're a coach, whether you're a vendor, whether you're a race producer. So really growth was the key, and inspiration was the key for me, reading a Sports Illustrated article to now, being inspired by your neighbor or inspired by your club or someone like yourself who's inspirational, who's probably been a Pied Piper of having more people come into the sport. So it's finding those ambassadors and kind of paying it forward in a way, because the sport's added so much meaning and impact. And it was the ability, I think, connect emotionally, because one thing about, it's great, it's health and fitness, and there's a lot of things you can do, but it's a little different from the community standpoint. I think triathlon is a little unique, crossing that finish line. Yeah. And, I remember your races in the full gear, and wow, that gives me chills. And so it's if you can do it in your full gear, the guy off the couch can go do his local sprint in normal gear.
In the spandex. It's not hard to see why you won that Triathlete Magazine Most Influential Person, because what you're talking about is so important, especially even right now, is that when people are struggling, is that why. And you hit it on the head. I got chills because you hit it on the head of, it is those inspiring stories. What's an inspiring story that you saw throughout your time with USAT that really resonated with you?
So there were many, and you see a lot of athletes leaving it all out there on the line, and so there's a point that's I've seen that many times when you see the classic, going back to the Julie Moss moment, that's still pretty famous, to hundreds of those moments up live in person. But the one that really sticks out for me was on 9/11 in 2016 in Rio at the Para Triathlon Championships.
Okay.
So there was a day, it's the women's amputee category. And we had won the gold with Alyssa Seeley, won the silver, and there is a sprint finish. And in that sprint finish is Melissa Stockwell and a competitor from the UK. And Melissa Stockwell was the first combat casualty. She lost her leg in Iraq. Woman, first female injury in Iraq. And the story is pretty deep here, because Another triathlete was in Iraq that day, also a soldier, a woman, and she somehow was friends with the surgeon who had operated on Melissa that day. So she saw him like that evening. How you doing? This guy, I just had to amputate a woman's leg. It was kind of a tough day.
Right.
So like years later, she finds out. They didn't know each other. Melissa and the other woman didn't know each other. Years later, her name was Jennifer. Jennifer finds out that she reads an article on Melissa Stockwell. Oh God, you were in Iraq together. She gets inspired to become a triathlete. So she was a top level swimmer. She ends up becoming a tandem pilot for a blind athlete because she just wants to contribute because of Melissa, her success as a para-triathlete. So back to that sprint finish. It's a beautiful day in Copacabana Beach in Rio. And, I'm in the stands and Melissa's just turning herself inside and out. You can see the sprint finish. And they come down, the Americans are just going crazy in the place. And I had just been in Rio 2 weeks earlier when Gwen Jorgensen, Wisconsin, close to you, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
At the time, was inspirationally, it was a great moment as well. We can talk about that. That was an amazing moment. But this even topped that off because Melissa gets the bronze and it's 9/11 and she has the military background and you see the 3 flags going up, pretty shortly afterwards to finish at 9/11. It was and the 3 women, I get great photos, all 3 amputees. Is just an amazing moment for me personally, for our sport, for Melissa, for our service members, our first responders. It was really an amazing moment.
That's unbelievable. Wow. You can't give me any more chills. But we're actually going to have to talk about something else that's probably going to give me chills because not only did you do amazing work with the USA Triathlon, but then you wanted to take on a different adventure. Now, I don't know how you correlate these 2 transitions. I guess they're endurance, and one is 8 days of endurance. But now you are the head of the Iditarod. How did that happen?
Well, so about 20 years ago, I came to Alaska, and I was going skiing up here, and I was sitting across from a woman who I didn't know who she was, but she was coming for the Iditarod, and it's an actress named Susan Lucci who's on All My Children. I didn't really know anything about her.
You weren't a soap opera guy?
Yeah, no, I missed that somehow. I'm soap opera free largely in my life. Maybe I'm missing it. But I'll respect to Susan. She was coming for the Iditarod, and so I started paying attention to it. And then oddly, I got recruited for this role for 3 different reasons. I mean, and in one way, the experience in the triathlon world and on the event production side, on the sponsorship, on the television and media side, and then they had, triathlon, had an issue with fatalities. So back in about 2013, 14, it was about 12 or 13 a year in races, which sounds like a lot, but there's over 4,000 events and most of this. So I decided to study this. So I compiled a group of cardiologists and, trauma people and race directors. And we put out a doctrine called the Shared Responsibility Doctrine. I think it's probably still on the website. Yep. to try to, one death was too many. And I'm sure you can relate to this from your as a first responder, and we were able to, I think, get a couple saves, get more consciousness into what was happening, and put out the report. And I think that before, I wanted to have sort of the FAA model. We'd look at each one, we'd learn something so we can prevent in the future. So what usually happened is people missing signs. There's usually in the water, and whether it's typically what happened, we kind of share the knowledge of what we learned in that process. Right. So in the Iditarod, dogs die. So it has happened in the past. Right. And so I came in. They had someone who come in and kind of challenge the reality around that. say, well, sometimes it's unavoidable. It's some of this is accidents, but there have been instances in the past where, they've got issues that have happened, where I won't get into technical details. And so I came in to kind of to say, look, one death is too many, and we'll put in our own version of that, which we're doing now. So it's a different standards. There's 55 veterinarians that work the race. Wow. And
55?
And so now we have a different process. So they needed someone as an outsider, I guess, to kind of challenge that process, what was happening. Now, it's not like dogs are not dropping dead. I don't want to, overstate it, but,
right.
It's been, over 100, over 47 years. So, on the average, there has been, a couple a year on average, and now 0 this year. And we intend to keep it that way. So that was one big thing. Other thing was the complexity of the event. And, well above a triathlon, right? So, but at least understanding, having run things like we ran the Chicago World Championship. We did 14 races downtown Chicago in 2015, and just understanding what it takes in contingency planning. But Iditarod is a whole nother level. We have our own Air Force. We have 30 planes. This year, because of COVID, we're supplying the 1,049 miles with our own power, with our own structures, with our own tents, our own campsites, as we roll up our supply chain in very much a military operation, but in Arctic conditions. So it's immensely complicated. So we have our own 30 planes. We have a National Guard helicopters. We had 3 rescued by Black Hawk this past year. We have 30 planes, 6 helicopters, and then we have a bunch of transportation planes. And now we're dropping stuff from the air for supplies with guidance systems, so we can drop down supplies like straw for dogs and food and things like that. So it's super complicated, and it requires a lot of contingency planning. So I had, not at the level of Iditarod required, but I at least had an understanding of incident command, and I'm sure you can relate to that. And fortunately, I've had some great people to work with. And then there's media and sponsorship and all those challenges that I've had a long background in. So in certain respects, I had a pretty good background. I think I'm pretty fortunate to be able to lead the Iditarod now, because it's an incredible community. The mushers, or the dog drivers, are just these extraordinary adventurers. They're like sleep deprivation ninjas. The race runs 24/7. They actually race harder in the night. It's crazy now because people think that, oh, it's freezing up there, but actually the problem is for the dogs, it gets a little too warm during the day. They run best below 0 degrees, between 0 and -20. So they're running hot. And then understanding the exercise physiology, the training of the dogs, which is as sophisticated as a triathlon Olympic program: periodization, training, massage, recovery, nutrition. Wow. A lot of diagnostics on the top. Now, on the top level, for sure. Some of these people are there just to finish the race, and they're not quite as dialed in their training. It's similar to an Asian version of elite, I guess, in the Ironman space or triathlon space.
Right.
But the top guys, their dogs are running on treadmills. They're training. They got them in the pool now and water training because it's too hot to run them hard. And it's the genetics is pretty interesting. So then it's understanding the emotional connection in the way that you do in the triathlon space, because not very few people are actually going to come to the Iditarod. But in our world now, which is so disconnected, and as all of our people are living on their phones more and more, and I'm just astonished at the growth of things like esports, where you're packing arenas and audiences to watch people play video games.
Yeah,
we're the antidote to that, right? We're a wilderness, and get out there and channel your inner adventurer. So I think it was a timing thing for me. Challenges. There's some huge climate change issues up here that cause a lot of water on the Iditarod course. Oh, wow. And that's roughly why we had 3 rescued, because they got stuck in slush and it's like quicksand, so they couldn't get their sleds out. And so we had 3 that had to be rescued. only 58 starters, 28 didn't make it. So 28 did not make it. So there's a high propensity of those that don't make it. They all carry a spot, a tracker, and there's sort of two buttons on the SOS. One is I'm in trouble, but it's not an emergency. The other one, it's emergency, and that sends the helicopter for the rescue if we can. Or so the other is probably a little slower process.
Rob, I can't tell you. We need more time. But I'm definitely going to have you on again because we need to find out more about the Iditarod because, to go from triathlon to the Iditarod, it is complete endurance, and that's what we're all about, is telling that story. And thank you so much for coming on today. I greatly appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure. Happy to be back. It was fun. Thank you.
Definitely. All right, thanks for joining us on In the Zone with Fireman Rob, brought to you by Endurance Zone TV.
Hey, what an amazing interview. Thanks again for joining us on Forged in the Fires podcast with Fireman Rob. We've got some great content coming up. As I always say, your strength is in your passion. Now go out there and make it a great day.
Thanks for listening and supporting the Forged in the Fires podcast with Fireman Rob. Remember, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast, and please share this episode with a friend or family. To find out more about Fireman Rob or reach out about a question, go to www.firemanrob.com. Until next time, live your life forged in the fires.